Okay, this video is about making your own fligs, but for the sake of those who don't really know much about fligs, a quick overview is they're nothing more than a floating jig, and the good news is they've been proven fish catchers for over 40 years. They were originally developed by the walleye guys for floating their crawlers and leeches and minnows above the bottom where the walleyes preferred them, but anglers all over the country have discovered them since and found out that they will catch just about all species in all waters. Since fligs have been popular, several manufacturers that make them available commercially, either online or in the stores, and they're available in a wide range of colors and shapes, so you have the chance to buy a few and try a few before you jump into making your own stuff. I've been making my own fligs for probably about 30 years, but I had a head start because I've been tying flies and making lures a lot longer than that. So I had the basic skills and materials long before I started making fligs. But in the past few years, I've come up with a lot of designs and shapes and colors that are available nowhere else commercially. The good news is, whenever I need a refill, I know the guy that makes them. Some of my first stuff was pretty rude and pretty crude and rudimentary. I just took different foam materials that would float, punched holes in them with a piece of pipe, broken rod blank, and put a sled on them, slid them on the line ahead of a hook with some bait on it. And the good news is they worked well enough to encourage me. My next step was to go ahead and start putting the foam bodies right on the hooks and maybe a little dab of paint, and even put some weed guards on some of the early ones. And again, they worked well enough to encourage me, so I kept on keeping on. If you're going to make your own fligs, here's a kind of a quick list of some of the things you'll need. Now, if you already have a well-equipped workshop, if you already make your own lures and that type of thing, tie flies, you probably got a lot of these things. If not, some of them you should have, others aren't absolutely essential. And these will be covered pictorially in a video a little farther on down the line. But just for quick reference, you'll need foam material out of which you're going to cut the flig plugs. You need hooks to put in them. You need super glue to glue them together. Paints and finishes and glitters to get that fancy finish. Flashabou and Crystal Flash are shiny fibers that make really good tail materials if you're going to be using tail fligs. Razor blades and cutting tools. Foam material needs to be slit in order to put a hook in, so a good sharp blade to cut a nice clean slit is necessary. Power drill for cutting plugs out of the foam material, and a rotary tool for smoothing and shaping the plugs before you are able to paint them. Fly tying vise, not absolutely necessary, but very helpful if you're making tail fligs. Hemostats, you won't be doing any operating, but these are great for holding the hooks while you're doing a paint job on your fligs. Scissors for a variety of trimming. Paint brushes, pretty obvious. Stir sticks for stirring the paint. Paint needs a lot of thinning, so you should keep it well thinned and stir it up each time before you use it. Round end sticks for making the eyes, larger ends for the base, and a smaller base for the black center pupil. Mixing cups for mixing up glitter and or glow powder into the clear medium if you're applying those over your fligs. And if you're going to be making whirly fligs, you'll need spinner blades and wire. Last but not least, basic dexterity and coordination are very helpful. But based on my early results, you can get by without a whole lot of skills, but it's helpful if you have some. Next general overview, which will be covered in more detail in a video. These are the step-by-step outlines that you'll be doing to make your fligs. First of all, you cut the plugs from the foam pads. Second of all, if you're making tail fligs, you'll need to wrap tail fibers on the hooks before you put them in the foam plugs. You pre-shape the foam plugs with a rotary tool. You slit the foam plugs for hook insertion. Insert the hooks. Apply super glue. And then do the final shaping and smoothing with the rotary tool. And then paint and glitter. And once you get to that stage, you're a flag maker. Are you ready to get started? Okay, in the preceding section, we had basic lists of tools and materials needed for making your flags. This section is a pictorial part for the tools that you'll need. First of all, you will need a power drill and some plug cutters for cutting down through the foam pads and making your plugs for the flags. And that means you will need some plug cutters of different sizes and shapes. And it takes a little practice to get used to making these and getting them to fit properly and to cut just exactly the flags you want for the flags you're making. Next, you'll need a rotary tool or Dremel and a 1/2-inch drum sander. That's for the rough shaping on the flags prior to slitting them and putting the hook in them. After the hook is in, then you use the deburring tool to smooth out the final rough edges on the flag and get it nice and ready for painting. A fly tying vise, not absolutely necessary, but if you're making tail flags, it sure helps to have one of these to clamp the hook while you're tying the tail materials on. If you already tie flies, you probably got one. If you don't tie flies, might be helpful to get one anyway. You'll need something sharp for cutting the foam. Razor blades will work, craft knife, small sharp knife. The one thing is the foam is, even though it's soft, it tends to dull a sharp knife very quickly. So even a razor blade needs to be touched up periodically to get the nice clean cuts when you need to make the slits to put the hooks in. Heavy-duty scissors for rough trimming. Fine point scissors for fine trimming and cutting the thread when you're doing your wrapping on your tail flags. Hemostats, again, you won't be doing any operations, but these are great for holding the hooks while you're doing your paint jobs. And it's good to have a wire rack or something that you can hang your flags on during the painting process, either between coats or for the final drying after you put your finish coat on. Paintbrushes, it's a good idea to have several different sizes and types. And if you don't have a real small one, you can cut down a larger one to make one like at the top. And you can use shorter ones and leave them inside your bottles of thinner, like the ones at the bottom. Paint stir sticks. Jig paints tend to thicken up a lot in between uses. So it's good to have a lot of thinner, and check your paint before you use it each time. Add a few drops of thinner if you need to, and use the stir sticks to stir it to proper consistency. Your paint will apply a lot better if it's properly thinned. Round end sticks for applying eyes. The larger ones, like the white and yellow, for the base part of the eye, and the black at the bottom, a finer tip for applying the black pupils. And also, if you're doing any fire tigers or others that have the red eye, a couple of different sizes of red are helpful to have. If you're going to be making whirly flags or spinners of any kind, there's some tools that you'll need over and above just a basic pair of pliers or round nose. You'll get wire nippers for cutting the wire fine right up next to the shaft. You'll need round nose pliers for making the loops in the wire, and that's a separate skill in and of itself. And if you have the round nose pliers, you won't need those expensive wire jigs. Angle nose pliers are good for holding onto the loop while you're doing the final one or two twists on your wire to finish the jigs off. You'll need plastic mixing cups. These are used to mix the clear gloss jig paint with whatever kind of glitter or glow powder that you're going to use. It takes some experimentation to get it right, and there's a difference between making a good thick batch to coat the whole jig with one color like silver or blue or red or whatever, or making just highlight coats like on the chartreuse or the white, where you just mix a small amount and do one light overcoat to make a highlight glitter. The final item in the tools is the airbrush. Now this is kind of foo-foo, but if you really want some super paint jobs and you know how to use an airbrush, you've already got one and you've got the right paints, you're in business. Otherwise, a lot of paints don't work well on the airbrush, and unless you have some basic skills, your final results aren't going to come out any better than if you use brushes. But to each his own. Ready to get started? Okay, this is the materials part of how to make a flig. And we start off with the foam material. Let's say I get the 1 inch thick or 1.5 inch thick kneeling pads. I use both. And be sure to get the high density foam because the less dense stuff just doesn't hold up well under fishing conditions. You can get it in even thicker sizes, but you generally don't need it. You want to have plenty of hooks of different sizes and colors, gold, red, and black nickel. And I use mostly size 1 on the tailed fligs, and size 2, 2/0, and 3/0, 4/0 on the bigger catfish jigs. For the very biggest catfish jigs on the gorillas and the kongs, I use 5/0 and 7/0, and use the big 8/0 hooks for sturgeon fligs. But very seldom use it as small as size 4. I do that on some of the ice fligs, but it's good to have a good variety. And I use the Matsuo sickle hooks. They've got a light wire, but they've got a super sharp hook, and they're also very strong for being light. And it's good to have a sharp hook because a lot of your hookups occur on the strike if you've got a good sharp hook. If you're making tail fligs, the holographic Flashabou is great material to have. Makes a beautiful tail. Ditto for crystal flash, some good metallic colors there. But it's all good stuff, just a matter of personal preference how you want your fligs to turn out. For glue, nothing better I've found than the Loctite Professional Super Glue. Dries clear, it bonds super fast, and it holds well underwater. It doesn't come apart like some of the super glues do, so good stuff. You can use almost any kind of paint to paint your fligs. You can use enamel, you can use acrylics, anything but watercolors. But I use a lot of the vinyl jig paints made by CS Components. Originally it was because I already had a lot of them on hand from all the jig making I do over the years with lead head jigs, and also use it on a lot of crankbaits and spinner blades. But I like it because it's available in a lot of places, and you can mix the colors to make your own custom colors if you want, and they hold up very well. They're very strong paint. If you're using a vinyl paint, you're going to need vinyl thinner. And the first thing you want to do is, like if you get a 4-ounce bottle, is pour 1 ounce or so of that in another bottle to use for brush cleaning. Then keep the clear stuff to add to your paints for thinning as you go along. And it does need thinning. They get thick. They get thick in between uses, and you have to put a few drops out of an eyedropper in and stir it up each time before you use it. Got almost every color of glitter known to man. Some of it I get from hobby and craft stores. Some of it I get from tackle outlets. I even get some from candle making supply place. Be sure to get the ultra fine or the fine. The larger stuff just doesn't make as good a finish. You can also put glow on your jigs if you fish at night or you're an ice fisherman. And don't use the glow paints that are available. They're pretty wimpy. They don't last worth a hoot. I use the Super Space Age Strontium Aluminosilicate glow powder, mix it with a clear gloss, apply it over white or chartreuse, and then put my paint jobs over that. And the stuff is super. It will last about 12 hours once you charge it up, and that's great. This is a clear gloss material that you use for mixing glitter and glow paint. It's clear, and it's also a good application over your paint jobs to add a little bit of depth and translucency. So you use a lot of that. I buy it in pint cans because I do a lot of glitter painting. One of the options for a final coating is epoxy, the 2-part epoxy. I use this mostly for lead head jigs and for crankbaits because they have to stand up to a lot of dinging on the rocks and sticks, and toothy critters, you don't have quite that problem with the Fligs. So normally what I like to do on the Fligs is just use the coat of the Seal Coat UV Blast. It's a kind of a milky color in the bottle, but it dries clear and it's a good hard coating. But the big thing is it adds a UV aspect that helps it show up a lot better under some light conditions. So that's really a good finish. If you're making whirly flags or spinners, you'll need some stainless wire, and I prefer the size 9 in this brand, which is a 105-pound test and 0.022 diameter. That means it's thin enough to work with well without perforating your fingers, but it's strong enough to hold any fish you're ever going to hook on it. For making whirly flags, I like to use the little propeller blades. They spin at just the slightest pull through the water, and so that makes them good for either slow trolling or even for cast and retrieve, because even at a 1/4 mile an hour or 1/2 mile an hour, those things just spin like crazy. I use the number 3 on the larger whirly flags, number 2 on smaller ones. I very seldom use number 1 on whirly flags. Colorado blades are good to have in your arsenal. A lot of good colors there. Walleye fishermen like the Colorado blades because they create more of a thump and a vibration. The only thing is you got to move them a little faster through the water. They got to be at least 3/4 of a mile to a mile an hour to get them to work well, and a lot of guys even go up to 2 miles an hour if they're doing bottom bouncer rigs. You can use almost any kind of blade that you want. There's a lot of them on the market and you can experiment with them, but one of the ones I would recommend that you have in your arsenal to try initially is some smile blades made by Mac. They're available in 2 or 3 different sizes and a lot of different colors. And the good news is they're very lightweight and they're bent just perfectly, so that, again, like the propeller blades, they spin at just the slightest movement through the water. So good to have, good to try. If you can afford a few of them, add those to your arsenal. Well, that about does it for the smile blades and the basic materials. Now let's get into putting some fligs together and see what that process is. Okay, this demonstration will show how to cut a flig plug from a 1-inch high-density foam kneeling pad. And you can use any size you want, but this is a good place to start. Now, one of the keys, use the power drill and use the appropriate size flig cutter. And one of the keys is to apply slow, firm pressure while you're cutting so that you end up with a nice, smooth flig. When you finish cutting, there's a little bit left on the end. You pull that out. And if you've done a good job, it's a nice smooth side, makes it a lot easier during the final smoothing and painting processes. Now, if you happen to want a plug longer than the 1 inch, then you cut a piece off the end of the 1-inch pad of the length of the flig plug you want, and then you cut down through it, just like you do the other one. And hopefully you end up with another nice smooth-sided plug, which makes it easier in the painting process. Okay, this little demonstration is to show how to use a rotary tool and a 1/2-inch sanding disc to do a rough shape on your flig plug prior to putting the hook in. So we start out with the flig plug. Okay, we do a rounding on one end and a taper on the other end. Okay, that's got round on one end, paper on the other end. Pull the excess fluff off. Now you're ready to cut it and insert the hook. Okay, this demonstration will show how to do a final smoothing and finishing in between putting the hook into the plug and painting it. So we do this again with the rotary tool and using a little burnishing attachment. Turn it on, hold on to the hook, go all around it, finish off any rough edges, smooth out any spots that need to be smoothed out before painting, and you end up with a Flig plug that's ready to paint. First step in making fligs is to cut the plugs out of the foam pad. This is a 1-inch pad as it's shown here, and you're cutting 1-inch fligs. Now, what if you need larger or longer fligs? Well, you can take a 1-inch, 1.5-inch foam piece, cut it like if you're making a 2-inch long flig for a big Kong flig or something, and cut a 2-inch wide piece off the smaller foam, and then cut vertically down through that. Works just fine. Next step is to do the preliminary shaping using your 1/2-inch sanding disc on your rotary tool. Do the tapering on one end and the rounding on the other as illustrated in the previous video. Next step is to make a hook slit so you can insert and glue the hook. I usually like to go about 2/3 of the way up the hook, or up the foam pad, in order to make a slit, and you have to be careful in working that blade back and forth so that you don't go all the way through, but you go deep enough to get the hook in. Then you insert the hook and work it back and forth, make sure it's properly positioned. If it isn't, you might have to take it out and give it another little bit of a cut with the razor blade in order to get it to fit properly. Once you got it set properly, take the pointed end of a skewer stick, dip it into the Loctite Super Glue Professional, and run a bead of it up and down the hook length and get that stick out of there very quickly, or else it'll become a part of your flig. Next step is just squeeze it closed, hold it for about 6 to 8 seconds, and that Loctite holds it really good. If it doesn't hold it good, if you're using a big thick piece of foam and it's not holding well after a few seconds, it's okay to put a small clamp on it or put a heavy weight on it. Usually about a minute will do the job. The next step is to do the final smoothing before painting. After you put the hook into the foam plug, then you use the deburring attachment to finish rounding it off and smoothing it out preparatory to painting. If you're like me, you like to do things in batches. So when I sit down to cut some plugs, I usually cut a whole bunch of them. Some of them I even pre-smooth and pre-shape, but that way I keep a few on hand that if I want to make a couple or 3 sample models of a new kind or something, I've got it available. I don't have to get all the material out and start from scratch. And that's about it in the basic assembly process. Now we'll get on to talking about some other specific models and painting and all that good stuff. Okay, now we'll talk about the painting. As I mentioned, you can use almost any kind of paint you want, but I like the vinyl jig paints by CS Components. The first step in painting, regardless of what you're doing, is you should put a good white base coat on over that blue foam. That will help all other colors to show up a lot better. And it usually takes 2 coats. The first coat usually doesn't completely cover up the blue, so it's a good idea to put a good first coat on and then a good second coat on, and then you're ready to do your painting. Same thing holds too for glitter. Even with a good white base coat, the first coat of glitter is not going to cover completely unless you put on a whole bunch of it, and that'll glob up and it'll run off and it won't make a good finish. So put a light first coat on to bond to the paint, and then you put a second coat to bond to the first coat, and that will give you plenty of coverage for your glitter. One of my favorite color patterns is Fire Tiger. And that starts with a chartreuse base and then the other colors over it. This is a step-by-step on how to make a fire tiger. Start off with the white base coat, like you do all the rest of them, with the white lure and jig finish. Then you put yellow chartreuse over that. That's your base coat over which you put the other colors. And the first step is to do a bright green back, and then an orange belly. Now this is actually Blaze Orange is the name of the color on this. Next, you use a very fine brush to make some black stripes, and you can either do those just straight vertical or you can put a little bend in them. You can get as creative as you want on that. After that, you put a highlight coat of glitter on. You just mix a little bit of the disco yellow glitter in the clear gloss, and then just do a quick swipe over the paint, and that each of the colors shows up a little differently with that gold glitter on it. Now the next step is to put the red eyes on there, and use a rounded end of a stick to dip in the flame red and just touch it lightly right in the front to make the red eye. And finally, after all your paint is dried, then you do a clear coat with the clear gloss, and this kind of gives the whole paint job a bit of additional depth and translucency. It really helps make it pop. Now the final coat, again, you have your choice of using 2-part epoxy if you want, but I prefer the UV blast, and that dries clear and it's good and hard, and it does give some UV value to the fish during certain light conditions. My next favorite color is the pale perch, and this is in the tail fligs. This particular model on a size 1 hook with a 1-inch body and the pale perch has probably caught more species of fish, small to large, than almost any other flig in my arsenal, and it's a good one to have. Start off, like all of them, with 2 coats of white paint. You do a green back, and you do an orange belly stripe either before or after you put the bars on, and it's a thinner belly stripe than you do on the Fire Tiger. It's just a narrow, thin belly stripe. The side green bars, again, use a thin brush and just make 3 vertical bars on this particular model. And the next one, just like with the Fire Tiger, you make a light mix of the disco yellow glitter and the clear gloss, and just make a quick swipe over it so that it kind of accentuates without covering up the colors. The next step is to start the eye by applying a yellow spot over the white using a round wood dowel with the appropriate sized end on it. And when that's mostly dried, then you use a small tip dowel to put a black pupil in the middle of the yellow, and that really makes it pop. Finally, after your paint is basically dry, put a coat of the clear gloss over it, and again it gives it a smoothness and a depth and a translucency prior to doing the final coat of UV finish. And your UV finish, as previously mentioned, makes a good hard finish coat, as well as giving it the UV properties that help it show up better under some light conditions. And the final thing is to have a painting rack that you can put your painted flags on in between coats, or in between color combinations and in between coats. And after you've put your final coat of finish on there, you can let them hang on this rack to dry and be ready for use. One of the specialty flags that I make that aren't available anywhere commercially, as far as I know, are tailed flags. These have a special outline and color combinations that have really been popular with not only myself, but quite a few other guys that have been using the flags. And they catch a whole bunch of different species of all different sizes. Amazing the size that we catch on these small flags. They're only 1 inch long on a number 1 hook, but we catch, catfish in excess of 10 pounds on them, big carp, big trout. They're a good flig. Now, the first step to making a tail flig is to wrap the tail materials on the hook that you'll be using, and a fly tying vise is very handy for that. After you get the tail materials tied on, you trim them to the length that you want, depending on the flig that you're making. Next thing is to make your flig plugs, and again, I mostly use them on the 1-inch size plug. You can make them on shorter or longer, it's up to you. The next step is the pre-shaping. Again, you taper them on one end and round them on the other. Next step is to cut the slit for the hook, being careful not to cut all the way through, but making it deep enough that the wrapped flig will fit in it, wrapped hook will fit in it. Okay, you insert your wrapped hook, make sure it fits snugly and that there's room to close it. If you need to take it out and make a minor cut adaptation with your razor blade, keep doing so until you get it to fit just right. Then apply the super glue. Again, a quick dip in the super glue and a quick run up and down the length of the flig and get the stick out of there so it doesn't stick. Then squeeze it firmly closed for 8 to 10 seconds. And you are ready for the next step, which is the final shaping and smoothing using your fine pointed deburring tool. And once you have that ready, you're ready for painting. Whirly fligs are one of my more recent developments, and the one that I'm kind of the most proud of, and has really turned out to work very well. Basically, it's just a flig with a spinner blade added for flash and vibration. And if you use the little airplane spinner blades like I do, they're ideal for slow trolling or bottom bouncing, but they also work great when you cast and retrieve them. Now, these can be used either with bait or plastics. Gulp minnows work great on them, and you can make them in a myriad of sizes and colors, with or without color beads. There's a whole lot of options on how you can make and finish these things, and they do work on almost all species on all waters so far, so we've been very happy with these. Kind of only natural that I evolved to the whirly fligs. Going back quite a few years when I was doing a lot more with flies, I discovered the pistol Pete's made by a guy over in Colorado, putting a little airplane spinner blade on the front of a fly. I dressed up some of my own flies with the spinner blades and made pistol pats out of them. Caught a lot of fish on them too. The next step is, since I make a lot of lead head jigs, modified some of the molds so that I could pour a little piece of wire in there, and before I finished the jig, I would put on a spinner blade and a couple of beads and clip the end off the hook. And believe me, these things really add a lot to fishing a piece of plastic or even a piece of bait. Now, my whirly fligs, I usually make with a single hook, and that's because I usually use them with a piece of bait or sometimes with a small tube plastic or a twister, but they also work extremely well with gulp minnows. One of the options I've come up with on the whirly fligs is adding a trailer hook so that you can make a crawler rig out of it and fish a whole night crawler. A lot of Utah walleyes have voted favorably for it, as have several other species, so it does work well. First step in making a whirly flig is to cut the blank, and I use anything from 1 1/4 to 1 1/2 inch plugs. And on the end, you just round off both ends. You really don't need to taper one end, although you can if you want to. Now, one of the big differences in a whirly flig is that you don't cut down through the middle and do any gluing on it. You push a wire, in this case a sharpened blowgun dart or a large needle, from end to end through the center to make a center hole. It takes a little practice to get that down, but with a little practice you can do it. The main idea is to put it in the middle of one end and have it come out the middle of the other end so that you've got a hole running straight through to put a wire through. Now, you put a piece of heavy wire, .040 or whatever, good stiff wire through through that drilled flig plug, and that gives you something to hold on to while you're painting it. And then you have a piece of foam that you can stick that down into in between painting coats or while you're doing the different colors. You end up with a painted flig that when it's all done and finished and everything else, you just slide it off the wire and you're ready to make your fligs. First step is wire preparation. You start with a 5 or 6 inch piece of number 9 stainless wire. You make a basic loop, put the hook on it, finish it off with a haywire twist. Now you're ready to add the other ingredients to make a whirly flig. And you assemble that. You have a wide range of options with different colors of beads or metal beads. You've got the body that you'll be putting on there. The next step is a small metal bearing bead. That allows the prop blade to spin on it very easily without hanging up. It's almost a friction-free spin. Once you got your basic parts ready to go, you put them all together, finish off the haywire twist on the end with the loop, and you've got yourself some fligs, some whirly fligs. Now, I make a couple of different sizes of whirly fligs. I make the 1.5 inch body and a 1 inch body. And on the larger ones, I use a number 2 hook. On the smaller ones, I use a number 4 hook, and a number 3 blade on the big ones, number 2 blade on the small ones. The good news is they both work on both large and small fish. And on any given day, you might just have to experiment to see what they want based on water conditions, water clarity, the type of bait you're using, and the species you're fishing for, but it does give you some additional options. Same thing with colors and beads. There's a whole range of things you can do to make different colors and in different color combinations. So let your creativity be your guide. One of the things I do is I add smile blades to some of my larger fligs, my gorilla fligs, as you can see on top, and those work great for catfish. On the bottom, I make some smaller fligs, call those pistol pats, and those work great not only for perch and crappie and other panfish, but they also catch some pretty good sized trout and other species. And one of my own inventions in the blade department is what I call a snarl blade. The smile blade curves both ends up at one end, making a smile. Mine, I curve one end down on one end and the other end up on the other end, making it look more like a snarl than a smile. But the good news is they're lightweight, and like the smile blade, they spin very, very well at even low speeds. So they make a very good blade for whirly fligs. Here they are on the bottom, a couple of smile blade rigs with walleye rigs and so forth. And also the Colorado blades. I mentioned Colorado blades before. This is what a Colorado blade whirly flig looks like, and it works very good. Well, that about concludes the making of specialty fligs, and it also completes pretty much this whole video on making your own fligs. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hope it gives you some good ideas, and hopes it improves your fishing somewhere on down the line.